Hi everyone, so I'm trying something different for the audio for this video, so let's hope that it works. We'll see what happens. So this is a little video about the haunting of Willington Mill House. I say house as the house was the place where the hauntings were more associated, although these days people talk more about it being Willington Mill that's haunted. However, the original stories come from the house, not the mill. Obviously, I don't have any photos of any ghosts. I think it would be a little bit too much to expect to have any photos of any of the ghosts. So the photos that you will see on your screen will just be of Willington Mill and Willington Mill House. Most of the photos will come from the time when the mill was still used as a flour mill, or just after. There aren't photos of how the mill looks now, which is obviously a lot smaller, because at that point in time, as you can see from the photo on your screen at the moment, it was 7 stories high. You can also see just behind the mill, you can see the mill house. You can make out its front door, and you can see the windows and what look like attic windows at the top, and in the distance behind you can also see Keelman's Row. So I thought I would do this little video just from newspaper articles that I've looked at recently, which report on several different ghostly sightings, etc., from the mill house. So basically, the Unthank family, or the Unthank family, I'm just going to go with Unthank, it's easier, lived in the house from 1806 until around about 1829, when the Proctor family went into partnership with the Unthank family, and they then moved into the house and the Unthank family moved out. It would seem that it was around the time of the Proctor family moving in that the ghost stories started. There had certainly been no reports of anything prior to them moving in. So some of the newspaper articles from the 1800s report things such as footsteps on the stairs, doors opening and closing, loud noises coming from the fireplaces, and even one report of something that sounded like a donkey running around in the room upstairs above them. There were also reports of hearing groans and laughter which sounded evil, so we are assuming that that would be somebody who sounded evil when they laughed, and they weren't laughing for fun. But it wasn't just sounds that were heard. There were talks of the beds being shaken in the night, and also Mrs. Proctor's sisters, who were staying at the house, claimed to have seen a mysterious female figure peer over them while they were in their beds. This figure then vanished into the wall. Edward Drury and an unnamed friend decided that he would stay a night at the house when only Mr. Proctor was at home. At around 1 a.m, he too saw a female figure with her head bent down forwards, one hand clutched to her chest and the other pointing her finger towards him. Edward, for some reason known only to him, tried to grab her, but she vanished. His friend, who slept through this whole sighting, saw nothing, and Mr. Proctor, who was awoken by the commotion, saw nothing either, but did hear Mr. Drury yelling, "Keep her off me," so he was clearly quite terrified by what he had seen. On another occasion, also reported in the newspapers of the time, it was suggested that 2 men known only as Tom H and Ned D also spent a night at the house. It doesn't state whether any of the family were at home or whether they were there just by themselves. Ned, who was on watch, was armed with a pistol. Not quite sure what he thought he was going to do with the pistol, because I'm quite sure that I've never heard anybody saying that they've shot a ghost. And Tom was asleep. Tom was awoken just after midnight by a scream and a shot being fired. Ned later explained that at midnight a figure appeared before him, and in a panic he shot at it and then fainted. The ghost clearly didn't get shot. There isn't much else to that story. That is it. That is where the newspaper article ends with that one. But at the time of the 1800s, the ghost or ghosts were very popular, and it seems that as the main sighting seemed to be female, she became known in the area as Kitty. The name, it appears, was chosen just as a nickname for her, and it was picked long before any stories emerged of Kitty being killed at the mill. So back to the 1940s, and there were other sightings reported in the papers in those times, the 1940s, 1840s. There were other sightings reported in the papers at that time, usually a woman or a bald-headed man, and even at one point in time, a white cat was said to have been seen in the area. Another tale, which wasn't reported in the papers until quite some time later, was about a man who had been passing the mill, again in around about 1840, to claims to have seen both a man and a woman. It was the witness, as we'll call him, as the witness states, a clear night with a very bright moon. There is no explanation as to where he had been, or where he was going. Had he been out for a drink? Was he walking home? Had he just been for a walk? Don't know. It also doesn't actually state at any point in time as to whether or not it was late or early evening. Obviously no month is mentioned, and as we all know, it can be dark from 6 o'clock, so he may have been sober, he may not have been. However, the man that then claims to have seen an apparition rise up from the direction of Church Bank Cemetery, and he said that the man was old, in dark clothes, and with a halo of light around him, and he apparently floated off towards the mill. It seems that at this point, the man, not the witness, was joined by a female who apparently floated out of the mill roof to join him. The witness continues his tale, saying that the two did not seem to see each other, but that both of them seemed to emit an air of sadness and distress around them. And it seems that the witness at this point decided that it would be a very sensible thing to do to shout at the ghostly figures. The figures apparently then turned towards him and then faded completely from view, and at this point it seems that the witness fainted. Waking some time later and hurrying home, he was quite surprised to find he had been out some 2 hours. He never saw either of these ghostly figures again, but some 30 years later he still remembered it as if it had happened the day before. It had obviously had a massive effect on his memory, and it was something that he was never going to forget. But was he drunk? Did he imagine it? Or did he really say it? I guess we really won't ever know. The Proctors eventually moved out of the mill house, claiming that they could not live there any longer, that they simply couldn't cope with all of the noises, of the sounds, of the ghostly figures that they were seeing, and they felt that the place was somewhere that they could no longer live. So they left, and the house was empty for a while, until Mr. Langdale, I believe I've got that right from memory, I hope I have. If I haven't, I will put a little footnote underneath where I've made the mistake, if I made a mistake. He moved in, and there were no further ghostly reports from the house. By 1884, it seems that the ghosts were all but forgotten, and nobody really mentioned them anymore. Prior to that, as I say, they had been so very, very popular. There were so many people wanting to try and find out what had happened, who had been killed or died in the area that could be the people that were haunting the house, There were also some newspaper reports that suggested that it was actually the Proctor family that were causing all of the apparitions to appear, as there were stories of similar issues happening in their new house. But that is just newspaper reports, and even back then you can't be sure whether the newspaper reports, of course, are right or wrong. But during the height of the ghost stories and the time when they were incredibly popular, there was actually a man who was known as the Man in the Dark, who wrote regularly to the newspapers claiming to be a friend of Kitty and claiming that she was always telling him what was going on in the area. As bizarre as that might seem, it appears that the newspapers were quite happy to print these newspaper articles, these letters, and it even reached the point where, when the man stopped writing to the paper for whatever reason, somebody else actually wrote to the paper asking, had they left? Was Kitty no longer at the house, because the man hadn't been writing for a while and he thought perhaps they had moved on. It's quite strange, the things that would have been printed in the newspapers in the 1800s. Later tales and stories obviously relate to Kitty the Mill Ghost having been somebody who was killed at the mill using a flower stone. My brain's just gone completely blank and I can't remember. A millstone. I knew I would get that eventually. Whether that story was true or not, I don't really know, but as this seems to have originated much later than the first ghost stories, it seems that it was unlikely that Kitty the Mill Ghost was ever a real person. It seems that she was just an adaptation of the ghost stories in later years, when some of the ghost stories from the house had long since been forgotten. The house was demolished some years ago, and of course it's no longer there now. At the moment, the house area where the house once was is actually the car park for Bryden Fibres, Bryden Ropes. So at the moment on the screen, what you can see is an actual millstone. The millstone is actually from the original mill, the original flour mill. The flour mill obviously was demolished a long time ago. It was adapted and changed to make the mill that we see today, and the millstone, while some work was being done, was found. The millstone that you can see, the photo there, is one I took several years ago. It can actually be found in the garden of Willington Mill, where what would have been the garden of the house, and it was placed there with a little plaque, which you will see in a moment, because this is just a picture of the millstone, but there is a plaque as well, and the plaque is dedicated to Kitty. Now, as I say, you'll see that photo in a moment. At the moment, you can just see the picture of the millstone. Quite large things. I don't know as to how anybody would get their hair trapped in that. I'm not really sure. That's a story of how Kitty was supposed to have been killed by getting her hair entangled in the machinery, which, if it was going to be a millstone, it would have to have been that. I guess, yes, it's possible, but at the same time, I still feel that the Kitty stories are just an adaptation, like I say, of the original ghost stories, which were mostly connected to the house. People still talk today of seeing things today. Sometimes that is just purely and simply because the idea is in your head and you've heard about it, and if a place is old and spooky looking or dark, you can think you've seen something. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. I did visit the mill, as I say, and to me it didn't feel very spooky, it didn't feel very haunted. It just felt like any normal building. Perhaps the top floor, which hasn't been modernised, might have felt a bit different, but as it was, it didn't feel any different where I was. It didn't feel like a haunted building, but I wasn't working there late at night in the dark with having watched this video and heard lots of ghost stories, so that would explain perhaps why I wouldn't have felt bothered by it. So as I say, to end this video here, as you can see, is the picture of the stone, the plaque that is on the millstone, and I don't know how well it is for you to see it, but I'll read it out to you. So it says, this millstone was found during excavations for a new boiler house in June, I believe that says 1962, on the site of the Old West Mill. In this area formerly stood a flour mill owned by Mr. Joseph Proctor, famed as all I think that says famed as all early steam-driven mill and haunt of the Willington ghost. So that is what that little plaque says. I've read that, and famed as all early steam-driven mill and haunt of the Willington ghost. That actually doesn't make any sense to me, but never mind. So that is basically my little information about the hauntings, etc. It's my take on the idea. I believe that the ghost stories originate and are connected mostly to the old mill house. They're not connected to the mill itself. I believe that Kitty is an adaptation of the earlier Kitties, the Kitties from the 1830s and the Kitties from the 1840s, and not the one that is from today, the ones that we've heard about from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, the 1920s and the 30s and the 40s. It's just not the same ghost. Anyway, that's my thought. You can decide for yourself, having listened to this, whether you think that the house ghosts are the ones, and that Kitty, the mill ghost, the one who worked at Haggis, didn't exist or did exist. It's up to you. Make your own mind up. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video and my absolute waffle, because I really truly have been waffling, but I hope you have still enjoyed it, and obviously thank you for watching.